Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture, where I'll be going through the practice exam questions related to this challenge lab. Now before we start into the questions, I just want to give you a very quick summary of my strategy for breaking down certification exam questions like these. The first step to breaking down an exam question is to understand what's going on. In any question, there's almost always going to be some description and then what I call a kicker. The key question at the end that might ask something like, how would you do this in a cost-effective way? Or how would you debug this problem? It's important to keep this key question in mind because this is really what you're answering. You also need to understand what everything means, both in the question and in each of the responses. But understanding doesn't just mean the terms, it also means that you should think through the data flow. The next step is to eliminate. You need to eliminate response options that have fake information or problems, something that goes wrong in them. And you should also get rid of responses that conflict with that key question, the kicker. Eliminating responses is a really critical part of answering these questions correctly. In fact, it's probably even the most important thing. Once you've eliminated different options, you need to evaluate the ones that are left. You can compare them with each other and think through what it means in terms of different trade-offs. Maybe some options will be much more expensive than other options, or some options are more secure than others. You should be thinking about all sorts of different trade-offs. You should definitely pay attention to the ones that are called out, but don't forget to consider the ones that are just implied, too. Once you've evaluated the options, you need to choose exactly the right number of options that the question requests. Some questions may ask you to choose 2 or 3 different responses, so make sure you do that. Now, sometimes a good way to do this is to order the options that you haven't eliminated in terms of how you've evaluated them, and then either just pick the ones at the top or knock out the ones at the bottom. After you've done that, don't forget to validate your choices. Make sure that you're actually answering the key question and that you don't accidentally wind up conflicting with it. But okay, enough about that. Let's move on to the first question. You have been tasked with configuring a number of to-be-created GCE instances. Which of the following should you do? Choose 2. So right off the bat, we're thinking about Google Compute Engine instances and how to set them up. A. Write one startup script per instance and pass it in as the startup-script metadata. Well, this might be possible. What would you do here? Let's say that you had 5 instances. You would be writing 5 different scripts. Doesn't seem ideal, but it might work. Let's keep going. B. Write one startup script for the fleet and pass additional metadata to each instance. Well, that definitely seems like an interesting possibility. Having only one startup script for a group of instances is much easier to maintain, and a good way to configure any instance level specifics is to pass additional metadata. So this definitely seems like a good option. C. Install the Stackdriver logging agent in your startup script. Well, this also seems like a good idea. When you do install the logging agent, you get better information about that instance, so that seems good too. D. In your startup script, double-check that the Stackdriver agent was already installed by default. Well, this is inaccurate. It's not installed by default. You have to install it yourself. So I would say we should eliminate D. E. Use Google's Instance Fleet service to run your pre-existing chef recipes. Well, you can use chef recipes to configure machines, which is something you might or might not know, depending on your background. But Google doesn't have an Instance Fleet service, so we should eliminate this option too. So we've eliminated options D and E, but now we have to choose exactly 2 of the remaining options. If I compare A and B, I definitely prefer B over A, so I would say that I should choose B and C instead, and these do seem to line up with the key question. Alright, next, question 2. Your accounting department wishes you to create Google Compute Engine instances with a label that has the key of department and the value of development, to assist with tracking the instances you create. Which of the following options is the best way to apply labels to those instances? Well, if we look at this question, it doesn't really matter why we're setting these labels, whether it's the accounting department that asks us or some compliance or just because we feel like it. That probably won't really affect which answers we choose. The key question here is which of the following options is the best way to apply labels to those instances. So option A, After the instance has been created, go to the instance details page and edit the labels section. Well, it is possible to edit the labels in the details page of an instance, so I wouldn't eliminate this option, but I don't really like this idea. You don't want to edit the labels after you've created it. You want to create it with the correct labels right off the bat. B. Write a command line script to apply labels to any newly created instances. Well, this seems to me again like it's working after the fact. You could write a command line script to do this, but it still doesn't seem ideal. C. Set a project-level metadata item called apply_labels with a value of department:\development. Well, this just seems wonky. Setting metadata like this is about communicating information to the running instances, and we need to talk to the GCE control plane to set the labels. This is a completely wrong data flow, and it wouldn't work unless you had something running on the instance to reach out to the control plane to set the labels. D. When creating the instance in the console, expand the Management tab and set the label there. Well, this would definitely work. If you are creating an instance manually, you could set the label there. This seems like the best option to me so far. E. In the console activity screen, set a trigger for instance creation and set the action to apply label department:\development. This isn't something you can do like that, so we should eliminate it. So in the end, I choose option D. Question 3. You believe that the startup script for a newly created GCE instance did not run at all. Which of the following steps should you take to help investigate this problem? Choose 2. A. Restart the instance in SSH mode. Well, there isn't an SSH mode, and you don't need to restart the instance to be able to connect to it, so we should just eliminate this. B. Press the SSH button on the instance details page in the console. Well, this definitely could work. There is such a button, and connecting to the machine definitely could help you investigate the problem. C. Go to the Stackdriver logs page for this instance and press the Pull Logs button. Well, no, this is wrong. This data flow does not work. Stackdriver does not pull logs from the instances. The instances are set up to push their logs to Stackdriver through the agent. Unsurprisingly, there is no such Pull Logs button, and this option is just wrong. We should eliminate it. D. Check the machine's syslog. Well, that definitely could help. In the syslog, you could see it trying to run this script. Maybe it failed to retrieve it from the metadata service, or maybe something went wrong when it did run. This could be very helpful information. E. From the instance, run the command curl-h google header:allow https://metadata/startup-script. Well, this is not going to work. The header is wrong, the address is wrong, and the metadata service uses the HTTP protocol, not HTTPS. We should definitely eliminate this. So we've eliminated options A, C, and E, so we're just left with B and D. Does it make sense to press the SSH button on the instance details page in the console and then check the machine's syslog? Definitely. Those are the right answers. Next question. Question 4. You have a GCE instance with a startup script that writes to GCS when it completes, but you are not seeing the file appear in the GCS bucket. Which of the following should you do to help diagnose this situation? Well, this scenario is very similar to our challenge lab, and that's because I modeled this question after our challenge lab when I was making it up. But it's still a perfectly valid question in its own right, so let's break it down. A. Look at the GCE console's monitoring tab to see whether any error messages were logged by the startup script. Well, this just doesn't work. The data does not flow like that. The GCE console's monitoring tab has information that it can get from the hypervisor. So it can see things like CPU usage, but it cannot see error messages logged by the startup script. We should eliminate this option. B. Look at the activity screen in the GCP console to see whether there is currently any outage. Well, an outage could potentially explain this, but you don't see that on the activity screen in the GCP console, so we should eliminate this option too. C. Check whether the scopes are set to allow writes to storage. Well, this is definitely an important thing to check, and it could help you diagnose the situation. So we don't eliminate this, but let's keep moving on. D. Check whether the instance has its Allow HTTP Traffic and Allow HTTPS Traffic checkboxes set. Well, this is the wrong direction for the data flow. Those checkboxes do exist, but they're all about opening the ports in the firewall for traffic that starts outside of the instance and is going into it. And nothing in this scenario requires or expects us to be running a server on that instance. That instance is simply reaching out. And you don't need these checkboxes set to connect to either the metadata service or to GCS. And we've seen that in practice in our challenge lab. We should eliminate this option too. E. None of the other responses is appropriate. Well, this is wrong and should be eliminated too, because when we came across option C, we thought it was good. So we stick with C, and that's the right answer. Question number 5. You have a GCE instance with a startup script that writes to GCS when it completes, but you are not seeing the file appear in the GCS bucket. Seem familiar so far? Which of the following should you do to help fix this situation? So we're dealing with the same scenario, but the kicker is just a little bit different. In this case, we want to do something to make it work, rather than just find out more information. A. Remove the default service account from the instance. Well, that doesn't seem valuable. In our challenge lab, we used the default service account, and it was able to write to GCS just fine. This is not the right answer. B. Restart the machine so that the metadata will be updated. Well, again, we saw that we don't need to restart the machine to get new metadata, so even if the problem was that some metadata was out of date, restarting the machine would be the wrong way to solve it. We should eliminate this option too. C. Wait at least 4 hours for the new bucket's DNS to propagate. Now, regardless of whether you know all about DNS propagation, we've seen firsthand that you don't need to wait 4 hours to be able to use a new bucket from an instance like this. This is wrong. D. Ensure that the bucket's allowed writers file includes this instance. Well, we never had to set anything about an allowed writers file. This is also not a good answer. E. Make sure that the instance's IP tables configuration includes the bucket's ANSI IP address in the allow full column. Well, this is just technobabble. Some of those terms might exist, but the way they're all put together makes no sense at all. And simply from your experience of going through the challenge lab, I think you could see that this isn't the right answer. F. None of the other responses is appropriate. Well, of all of these responses, I think this is the only one that makes sense. And that's the right answer. Well, alright, I'd like to leave you with this reminder about the question strategy. But I'd also like to ask you, does this make sense to you? Do you see how thinking through the data flow leads to many option eliminations in questions like these? Do you feel confident that you would now be able to answer questions like these on your exam? Well, if you have any questions for me, please let me know. If not, please feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.